The radiator clicked and groaned in the corner of the small alterations shop. Snow was falling outside the window, soft and steady, turning the downtown street into something from a photograph. Eleanor Vance sat alone at her cutting table, phone pressed to her ear, waiting for her husband to answer. Walter picked up on the fourth ring. What? His voice came through flat. Distracted. The single word carrying more dismissal than a paragraph could hold. The heating system, Eleanor said. The repair company came today. They said if we do not replace the unit, it could fail completely by January. And it is $1,200. I have covered what I could from the business account, but I am short. I need $200 to make the deposit. The silence that followed was not thoughtful. It was not the pause of a man considering how to help. It was the silence of inconvenience, of irritation barely contained. Eleanor, I do not know what to tell you. Walter's voice carried the edge she had come to recognize over the past several years. Impatience dressed as reason. Contempt dressed as practicality. Maybe if you had expanded the business like I suggested instead of staying small, you would not be in this position. You have been hemming pants and letting out waistbands for 26 years. At some point, you have to admit it is not working. I am asking for $200, Walter. And I am telling you I do not have it to spare. The dealership is stretched thin. You know that. There was movement on his end. A door closing somewhere. A murmur she could not quite make out. Someone else's voice, perhaps. Or perhaps just the sound of his attention being elsewhere, as it always seemed to be now. Figure it out, he said. You always do. The line went dead. Eleanor sat motionless, phone still pressed to her ear, listening to nothing. The radiator clicked again. Outside, a mother walked past with a child bundled against the cold. Normal life continuing while hers cracked along fault lines no one could see. She lowered the phone slowly and placed it on the cutting table. Then she opened the drawer beneath the table and removed a small leather folder. Welcome back to another powerful story, my beloved listeners. Kindly tell where you are watching from and what time it is where you are at. If you are new here, prepare for a story of betrayal, unexpected love, and what truly makes a family. Drop everything and listen closely. This tale of heartbreak and redemption might just change how you view love and family forever. Eleanor opened the leather folder and looked at the documents inside. Investment statements. Trust paperwork. Correspondence with a financial advisor named Ruth Pearson in the city. 25 years of careful, quiet accumulation. The total on the most recent statement read $4,847,291. She could buy Walter's struggling dealership outright. She could pay off every debt they had ever accumulated. She could solve the heating problem with a single phone call and never think about it again. Instead, she had asked her husband for $200, and he had refused her with contempt. She turned to the second section of the folder. These documents were newer. 3 months old. The letterhead belonged to a law firm in San Francisco, and the subject line referenced the estate of Vivian Ashworth. Great Aunt Vivian. A woman Eleanor had met exactly 4 times in her life. A woman who had moved to California in the 1960s and built something extraordinary in the decades that followed. A woman who had watched Eleanor's quiet life from a distance and, in the end, decided she deserved more. The inheritance had arrived without warning. A phone call from an attorney Eleanor had never heard of, explaining that she had been named sole beneficiary of Vivian Ashworth's estate. The estate included a controlling stake in a technology company called Meridian Systems. The value of that stake, as of the most recent valuation, was approximately $2.1 billion. Eleanor looked at the number. She had looked at it many times over the past 3 months, trying to make it feel real. It never quite did. The zeros seemed to multiply beyond comprehension, beyond anything that could touch her actual life. But they were real. The attorneys had verified everything. The accountants had confirmed. The company's board had been notified that their new majority shareholder was a seamstress from a small town in Pennsylvania who had spent her life making other people's clothes fit better. She had told no one. Not her friends. Not her customers. Not the women at church who had known her for decades. And certainly not Walter. At first, she had kept the secret because she needed time to process. The reality was too large to share before she understood it herself. Then, as weeks passed, a different reason emerged. A quieter reason. A reason that had crystallized into certainty over the past month as she watched her husband grow more distant, more dismissive, more careless with his cruelty. She needed to know if he loved her. Not the money she might have. Not the life she could provide. Her. The woman who sat in this shop every day, working with her hands, building something small and good and real. The woman he had married 26 years ago and promised to cherish. The $200 request was a test. The final test in a series of small tests she had been conducting without quite admitting it to herself. Could he help her with something simple? Could he respond with kindness instead of criticism? Could he remember, even for a moment, that they were supposed to be partners? He had failed. Eleanor closed the folder and returned it to the drawer. Then she sat in the dim light of her shop, surrounded by fabric and thread and the tools of a craft she had spent her life perfecting, and she understood that her marriage was over. The only question now was what came next. She picked up her phone and made a different call. "Ruth," she said when the advisor answered. "I need to meet with you tomorrow. And I need you to recommend someone. A private investigator. Someone thorough and discreet." There was a pause on the other end. Ruth Pearson had been Eleanor's financial advisor for 20 years, the only person who knew about the investments Eleanor had built in secret. She did not ask unnecessary questions. "I know exactly who you need," Ruth said. "His name is Dennis Harding. I will send you his information tonight." "Thank you, Eleanor." Ruth's voice softened. "Are you all right?" "I will be," Eleanor said. "I just need to understand some things first." She ended the call and looked out the window at the falling snow. Somewhere across town, Walter was at the dealership. Or perhaps not at the dealership. She had begun to notice the gaps in his stories, the times that did not add up, the phone calls he took in another room. She had noticed, and she had said nothing, because she had been waiting. Hoping she was wrong. Hoping the man she married was still in there somewhere, buried beneath the years of disappointment and resentment. Now she would find out for certain. She turned off the lights and locked the shop door. The snow was falling harder now, accumulating on the sidewalk in a soft white blanket. She walked to her car and sat behind the wheel without starting the engine. 26 years. She had given him 26 years of her life. She had supported his dreams when the dealership struggled. She had managed their household when money was tight. She had absorbed his moods and excused his distance and convinced herself that marriage required sacrifice. All while building her own wealth in secret. All while waiting to surprise him someday with the security she had created through patience and discipline. All while believing that he would be proud of her when he finally knew. Now she understood that he would never have been proud. He would have been threatened. Angry. Resentful that she had succeeded where he had failed. She started the car and drove home through the snow. Walter's car was not in the driveway. She went inside and made herself dinner. Simple food, prepared without thought. She ate alone at the kitchen table where they had shared thousands of meals, and she felt nothing at all. Her phone buzzed with a text from Walter. "Working late at the dealership. Do not wait up." She looked at the message for a long moment. Then she set the phone face down on the table and finished her meal in silence. The meeting with Dennis Harding took place 2 days later, in a small office above a printing shop downtown. The space was modest and unremarkable, exactly the kind of place that attracted no attention. Dennis himself was a man in his 60s with careful eyes and a manner that suggested nothing surprised him anymore. He listened without interruption as Eleanor explained what she needed. "I want to know where my husband goes when he says he is working. I want to know how he spends money. And I want to know if there is someone else." Dennis nodded, making notes in precise handwriting. "How long have you been married?" 26 years this March. "And how long have you suspected?" Eleanor considered the question. "The affair, if there is one, perhaps 6 months. That he has stopped loving me, longer. That he sees me as an obstacle rather than a partner." She paused. "I think I have known that for years without admitting it." "What triggered the investigation now?" "He refused to help me with a small expense for my business. $200 for a heating repair. He did it with contempt, as though asking him for anything was a burden he could no longer tolerate." Eleanor met Dennis's eyes. "I realized I was done accepting crumbs from my own marriage." Dennis wrote something else, then looked up. "Mrs. Vance, I have to ask. Most clients in your position are emotional. Angry or devastated or both. You seem remarkably composed. I have had time to process, Eleanor said. And I have learned that emotions are useful, but decisions should be based on facts. Right now, I need facts. Fair enough. I will need his full name, workplace, vehicle information, phone number if you have it. Anything about his habits and routines. Eleanor provided everything. Walter's schedule, the dealership address, the names of employees he mentioned, the restaurants he favored. She spoke with the precision of someone who had been observing her own marriage from a distance for years, cataloging details without quite knowing why. When she finished, Dennis set down his pen. Give me 2 weeks. I will have preliminary information by then. 2 weeks. Eleanor drove back to her shop, thinking about the strange bifurcation of her life. This morning, she had met with a private investigator to document her husband's betrayal. This afternoon, she had a video call with Ruth Pearson and the executive team of a technology company worth billions. She was a seamstress who owned a controlling stake in one of the most successful firms in the country. She was a wife whose husband refused her $200. She was a woman who had spent 26 years being underestimated, and who had used that underestimation as a shield. The shop was quiet when she arrived. She made tea and set up her laptop in the back room, then joined the video call. The faces on her screen belonged to people who had built Meridian Systems from a startup into a giant. The CEO, a woman named Patricia Chen, had been with the company since the beginning. The CFO, the head of engineering, the general counsel. All of them watching Eleanor with careful respect. Mrs. Vance, Patricia said. Thank you for joining us. We have updates on the quarterly performance and some strategic decisions that require your input. Please, call me Eleanor. They walked through the numbers. Revenue growth, market expansion, competitive positioning. Eleanor listened and asked questions, drawing on the research she had done over the past 3 months. She was not a technology expert, but she understood systems. She understood how to break complex problems into manageable pieces. She understood people. Her teaching background helped. Not formal teaching, but the informal education she had provided to dozens of young seamstresses over the years, showing them how to see the structure beneath the surface, how to anticipate problems before they emerged, how to take pride in work done well. Your questions are insightful, the CFO said after Eleanor pointed out a discrepancy in the projections. Most shareholders at your level do not engage with this level of detail. I believe in understanding what I own, Eleanor said. Aunt Vivian trusted me with this. I intend to honor that trust. After the call ended, she sat in the back room of her alteration shop, surrounded by bolts of fabric and spools of thread, and marveled at the absurdity of her situation. This morning, Walter had complained about the electric bill. This afternoon, she had approved a strategic initiative that would generate $50 million in new revenue. She almost laughed. Instead, she went back to work, because a customer was coming at 3 for a final fitting, and the dress needed to be perfect. The days that followed established a rhythm. Each morning, Eleanor opened her shop and greeted her customers. She pinned hems and adjusted waistlines and listened to women talk about their lives while she worked. This was the part of her job she had always loved most. Not just the craft, but the connection. The quiet intimacy of helping someone look their best. Each afternoon, she managed her other life. Video calls with Ruth Pearson about investment strategies. Briefings from Meridian's executive team. Reviews of financial documents and market analyses. She was learning fast, absorbing information with the same attention to detail she brought to her sewing. Each evening, she went home and played the role of Walter's wife. This was the hardest part. Sitting across from him at dinner, listening to his complaints about the dealership, responding to his questions with appropriate interest. He had become more attentive since the phone call about the heating repair. Perhaps guilt, perhaps the cyclical pattern she had observed over the years. Periods of distance followed by brief performances of affection, followed by distance again. "How was your day?" he asked one evening, not looking up from his phone. "Fine." A bride came in for her final fitting. The dress turned out beautifully. "That is nice." The conversation ended there. It usually did. She watched him scroll through his phone, thumbs moving with the casual ease of long practice. Who was he texting? What was he reading? She used to believe it was work, dealership matters, the constant demands of a struggling business. Now she was not sure. "I'm going to take a bath," she said, standing. "Okay." He did not look up. In the bathroom, she ran the water and sat on the edge of the tub. 2 more days until Dennis's preliminary report. 2 more days of performing this marriage while waiting for confirmation of its death. She looked at her reflection in the mirror. The same face she had worn for 58 years. Lines around her eyes now, grey in her hair, but still recognizably herself. Still the woman who had built a secret fortune through patience and discipline. Still the woman who had been dismissed and diminished by the person who should have valued her most. That woman was about to take control of her own story. The call from Dennis came on a Tuesday afternoon. "I have what you need," he said. "Can you come to the office?" Eleanor closed the shop early for the first time in 3 years and drove through light rain to the printing shop building. Dennis was waiting with a folder thick enough to suggest he had found more than she expected. "Sit down, Mrs. Vance." "She's Saturday." Dennis opened the folder. "Your husband has been seeing a woman named Carolyn Ashby for approximately 14 months. She is a sales manager at a competing dealership across the county. They meet 2 to 3 times per week at an apartment he rents under his business name. The rent is paid through an account you did not know about." He slid photographs across the desk. Eleanor looked at them without expression. Walter and a woman. Blonde, perhaps 40, attractive in the polished way of someone who worked in sales. They were walking into a building together. His hand was on her lower back. In another photograph, they were at a restaurant, heads bent close, smiling. In another, they were leaving the same building, and Walter was checking his phone while Carolyn adjusted her coat. The images were clear and undeniable. "There is more," Dennis said quietly. He pulled out bank statements. "He has been moving money from your joint accounts into this separate business account for approximately 2 years. Small amounts. 200 here, 300 there. Nothing large enough to trigger your attention, but it adds up. He has taken approximately $15,000 over the past 24 months. Eleanor studied the statements. The pattern was clear. While she had been carefully budgeting, worried about bills, asking him for $200 for a heating repair, Walter had been systematically taking from their shared resources to fund his other life. "That is not all," Dennis said. She looked up. "He has been meeting with a divorce attorney. The consultations started 8 months ago." He paused. "I was able to obtain some information about his strategy. His attorney's notes reference your quote limited income and negligible separate assets. He is planning to file for divorce after the holidays. Probably January. He believes you have nothing, and he is positioning himself accordingly." Eleanor sat very still. 8 months. He had been planning this for 8 months. Every dinner together, every casual conversation, every moment of performed normalcy. All of it was a countdown in his mind. A waiting period before he could dispose of her cleanly. "There is one more thing," Dennis said. He showed her his tablet, where he had compiled text messages. "I was able to document communications between your husband and Ms. Ashby." Eleanor read through the messages. The words blurred together after a while, but certain phrases stood out. "When are you going to tell her?" "Soon. I promise. Just need to handle it right. She is emotional and I do not want drama. And later. She has no idea. Still asking me for money for her little shop. Pathetic, really. And later still. After our anniversary. I will tell her then. I do not want to seem like a complete jerk leaving her right before." Eleanor set down the tablet. "How much do I owe you?" she asked. Mrs. Vance, given the complexity and speed required. "Dennis." Eleanor met his eyes. "I need to be honest with you about something, because I trust your discretion and I may need your services again." She paused, considering how much to reveal. 3 months ago, I inherited a substantial fortune from a great aunt I barely knew. My current net worth is approximately $2.1 billion. My husband has no idea. He never will, until I choose to tell him." Dennis's face remained professionally neutral, but his eyes widened slightly. "The $200 request was a test," Eleanor continued. "I wanted to know if he would help me with something small and simple. He failed. Now I know why." She stood and gathered the folder. Please continue documenting everything until I say otherwise. I want every financial transaction traced, every meeting logged, a complete timeline. I will need this for divorce proceedings. I can do that, Dennis said, standing as well. He paused. May I say something? Of course. In 30 years of this work, I have seen many betrayed spouses. Most are devastated or enraged or both. You are neither. He looked at her with something like respect. You are strategic. That will serve you well. I have spent my life learning patience, Eleanor said. And I have learned that the best response to bad behavior is not anger. It is consequence. She left his office and sat in her car for a long time, looking at the photographs in the folder. The woman in these images was her husband's real life. The dinners, the apartment, the plans for the future. All of it was real to him in a way that Eleanor had not been real for years. She thought about the text message. Pathetic, really. That was how he saw her. The woman who asked for $200. The woman who ran a little shop. The woman who had no idea. He was wrong about so many things. But he was right about one. She had no idea. Not about who he really was. Not until now. She started the car and drove to her next appointment. Gloria Renton, attorney at law. Specializing in family matters and estate planning. Recommended by Ruth Pearson as someone who understood discretion and strategy in equal measure. Gloria's office was on the 30th floor of a glass building downtown. The view stretched for miles, the city spreading out beneath grey winter clouds. Gloria herself was a woman in her 60s with silver hair and a manner that suggested she had seen every variation of human failure and was no longer surprised by any of it. She reviewed Dennis's documentation with methodical attention, occasionally making notes in precise handwriting. Your husband has exposed himself significantly, Gloria said finally. The financial manipulation is well documented. Combined with the infidelity and his own divorce preparations, we have substantial leverage. What about my assets? Eleanor asked. Gloria looked up from the papers. Ruth briefed me on your situation. The inheritance from your great-aunt. The investments you have accumulated separately over 25 years. All of it held in your name alone, with no commingling of marital funds. That is correct. Then it is completely protected. Inheritance and separate property laws in this state are clear. Your husband has no claim to any of it. She paused. He does not know. He does not know. Gloria allowed herself a small smile. Mrs. Vance, your husband has spent 8 months preparing to divorce you under the assumption that you have nothing. He has hidden money, conducted an affair, and consulted attorneys about minimizing your settlement. And the entire time, you have been worth more than $2 billion. Yes. What do you want to do? Eleanor had thought about this question for weeks. Late at night, unable to sleep. During slow afternoons at the shop when her hands worked automatically and her mind wandered. The answer had crystallized slowly, taking shape like a pattern emerging from fabric. I want to file for divorce on a specific date, she said. When? March 15th. Our anniversary. Gloria studied her for a long moment. That is deliberate. Yes. Eleanor folded her hands in her lap. For 26 years, I have been measured by what I appeared to lack. Walter looked at my shop, my clothes, my modest requests, and decided I was small. He made plans to leave me because he believed I had nothing to fight with and nowhere to go. She paused. On March 15th, I want him to understand exactly how wrong he was. Not through anger or confrontation. Just through the simple revelation of truth. Gloria nodded slowly. I have represented many clients in divorce proceedings, Mrs. Vance. This is the first time someone has described it as a revelation. Perhaps that is why it will work. They spent the next hour discussing strategy, documentation, timing, presentation. Gloria explained the legal mechanisms, the protections Eleanor's separate assets afforded her, the leverage the affair and financial manipulation provided. By the time Eleanor left the office, the sun was setting. The city lights were coming on, one by one, transforming the grey afternoon into something glittering and alive. She drove home through evening traffic, thinking about the months ahead. December, Christmas, the new year. 8 weeks of performing her marriage while knowing it was already dead. 8 weeks of smiling at Walter across the dinner table, pretending not to notice the phone calls he took in another room, the absences he explained away with thin excuses. It would be difficult. But she had spent 25 years building wealth in secret. She had spent 3 months managing a $1 billion inheritance without telling a soul. She could manage 8 more weeks of patience. Walter was home when she arrived, standing in the kitchen with a glass of wine. "There you are," he said. "I was starting to wonder. I had some errands to run." Eleanor set down her purse. "How was your day?" "Fine. Busy. The usual." He turned back to his wine, already losing interest. His phone was on the counter, face down. It buzzed with a notification he did not check. "I was thinking," he said after a moment. "Our anniversary is coming up in a few months. 26 years. We should do something." Eleanor felt something cold move through her chest. He was planning to divorce her after the anniversary. And yet here he was, suggesting they celebrate. "What did you have in mind?" she asked. "I do not know. Dinner somewhere nice, maybe." He shrugged. "We can figure it out." "That sounds lovely." She went upstairs to change, leaving him in the kitchen with his wine and his secrets. In the bedroom, she stood at the window and looked out at the street. The neighbors' houses were decorated for Christmas, lights twinkling in the early darkness. 26 years. She had given him 26 years, and he had decided they were worth discarding. But he did not know what he was discarding. He did not know that the woman he called pathetic had built more wealth than he would see in 100 lifetimes. He did not know that she owned a stake in a company whose technology powered half the corporations in the country. He did not know that she could buy his dealership, his apartment, his mistress's career with pocket change. He would learn. On their anniversary, he would learn everything. Christmas arrived with a peculiar mixture of warmth and emptiness that had characterized their holidays for years. Eleanor decorated the house as she always did, hanging ornaments on the tree, arranging candles on the mantel, creating the appearance of celebration. Walter gave her a scarf. Silk, reasonably expensive, but chosen without thought. She could tell he had bought it quickly, probably at the last minute, probably suggested by a saleswoman who sensed his indifference. "It is beautiful," she said. "Thank you." She gave him a watch. A good one, carefully selected. Her last gift to the man she had married, purchased with money from her secret accounts. "Wow," he said, examining it. "This is really nice, Eleanor." "Thank you." For a moment, he seemed genuinely pleased. For a moment, she glimpsed the man she had fallen in love with 26 years ago. The man who had brought flowers to her first little shop and told her she was talented. That man was gone. Perhaps he had never really existed. Perhaps she had invented him to fill the loneliness of her 20s. They had dinner with Walter's sister Janet, who had driven in from the suburbs with her husband. Janet had always treated Eleanor with a particular kind of condescension, the kind reserved for women who had not achieved enough by conventional measures. "So how is the little shop?" Janet asked over dessert. "Still doing alterations." "Business is good," Eleanor said. "Steady. That is nice." Janet's smile did not reach her eyes. "I always admired how you stuck with it, even when it did not exactly take off." Eleanor said nothing. There was no point in responding to insults disguised as compliments. Later, when the guest had gone and Walter was watching television in the living room, Eleanor washed dishes alone in the kitchen. The house felt too quiet, the Christmas music on the radio somehow making the silence worse. Her phone buzzed with a text from Ruth Pearson. "Thinking of you today. Call me if you need anything." Eleanor typed back a thank you, then stood at the sink looking out at the dark backyard. The snow from December had melted, replaced by the grey mud of late winter. Everything looked tired and worn. 3 more months. She could endure 3 more months. New Year's Eve was worse. Walter claimed a business emergency and left her alone in the house, promising to be back before midnight. He was not. Eleanor did not wait for him. Instead, she drove to the city, to the penthouse apartment she had purchased 3 months ago through an anonymous LLC. It occupied the top floor of a building downtown, with views of the river and the bridges and the lights of the city spreading out in all directions. She had furnished it slowly, choosing each piece herself. Modern lines, warm colors, nothing that reminded her of the house she shared with Walter. This was her space, untouched by his presence, uncontaminated by his judgment. She poured herself a glass of wine and stood at the window watching fireworks explode over the water at midnight. "Happy New Year," she said to no one. The new year began. January passed in the strange suspended animation of waiting. Eleanor went to her shop each morning, greeted her customers, performed her craft. She attended video meetings with Meridian's executive team, learning more each week about the company she now controlled. She went home each evening and performed her marriage for an audience of one. Walter grew bolder as the weeks passed. He came home later. His excuses grew thinner. One night, he did not come home until 2 in the morning. "Where were you?" Eleanor asked when he finally appeared in the bedroom. "Car trouble," he said. "Then a client wanted to talk. You know how it is." She knew exactly how it was. Dennis had texted her photographs earlier that evening. Walter and Carolyn at a restaurant, then entering the apartment together. "I was worried," Eleanor said. "You worry too much," Walter replied. He kissed her forehead absently and climbed into bed. "Go back to sleep." She lay awake beside him in the darkness, listening to his breathing slow as he drifted off. He was comfortable, confident, certain that his plans were proceeding exactly as intended. He had no idea that his wife was lying beside him with a folder of evidence in her nightstand, a divorce attorney on retainer, and a fortune beyond his comprehension waiting to be revealed. February brought Valentine's Day. Walter gave her flowers, grocery store roses, already wilting. He took her to dinner at a mediocre Italian restaurant and spent most of the meal checking his phone. "Sorry," he said each time. "Work emergency." "It is fine," Eleanor said. She had stopped caring about his excuses. They were merely data points now, additional evidence of who he really was. The anniversary loomed. March 15th. For weeks away, then 3, then 2. Eleanor made reservations at the Thornbrook, a restaurant in the city that she happened to partially own through one of her investment holdings. The best table. A private corner overlooking the river. Everything arranged exactly as she wanted it. She met with Gloria one final time to review the documents. The divorce petition was ready. The financial documentation was complete. The evidence of Walter's affair was organized and irrefutable. "Are you certain about this?" Gloria asked. "I have never been more certain of anything." 1 week before the anniversary, Walter mentioned it again over breakfast. "So our anniversary," he said. "Did you ever make those reservations?" "The Thornbrook," Eleanor said. "Friday at 7. He nodded, looking at his phone. "Looking forward to it," he said without enthusiasm. She watched him scroll through his messages, watched his thumb move with the casual familiarity of long habit. He had no idea what was coming. He was still thinking about his own plans, his own timeline, his own carefully constructed exit. He thought he was going to be the one ending this marriage. He was wrong. The morning of March 15th arrived grey and cold. Eleanor woke before dawn and lay in bed watching the light slowly fill the room. Walter slept beside her, breathing steadily, peaceful in his certainty. She got out of bed and stood at the window. 26 years ago today, they had exchanged vows in a small ceremony at the courthouse. She had worn a simple white dress she made herself. He had worn a suit borrowed from his father. They had been young and hopeful and full of plans. Now those years stretched behind her like a road she would never travel again. She showered and dressed with care. A navy dress she had made herself, understated elegance, the kind of garment that drew no attention but fit perfectly. She looked at herself in the mirror and saw a woman who had spent decades being underestimated. That woman was finished hiding. Walter appeared in the doorway as she was putting on earrings. "Happy anniversary," he said. "Happy anniversary." He crossed the room and kissed her cheek. The gesture was automatic, devoid of warmth. "I have something I want to talk to you about tonight," he said. "Something important." Eleanor met his eyes in the mirror. "So do I," she said. For a moment, something flickered across his face. Uncertainty, perhaps, or curiosity about what his limited wife could possibly have to say that mattered. Then it was gone, replaced by his usual expression of vague distraction. "See you at 7, he said, and left for the dealership. Eleanor spent the day at her shop, but she did not work. She sat among the fabric and the sewing machines, saying goodbye. Not to the shop itself, which she would keep. But to this version of her life. The version where she hid her wealth and performed her marriage and accepted crumbs from a man who had stopped seeing her years ago. At 5 o'clock, she closed the shop and drove to the city. She stopped at her penthouse to freshen up, then proceeded to the Thornbrook. The maître d' knew who she was. He greeted her with quiet deference and led her to the table she had reserved. The best seat in the house, overlooking the river, far enough from other tables to ensure privacy. She ordered wine and waited. The minutes passed slowly. She watched the door, watched the other diners, watched the lights of the city begin to glitter as darkness fell. In her purse was the folder Gloria had prepared. Everything Walter did not know. Everything he was about to learn. At 7:15, he arrived. He looked uncomfortable in his new suit, clearly purchased recently and probably charged to the secret credit card Dennis had documented. He scanned the restaurant, spotted her, and made his way to the table. "This place is nice," he said, sitting down. "Very nice. I am glad you like it." They ordered wine, appetizers, entrees. The food was exquisite. Eleanor had helped select the chef during the acquisition meetings, had reviewed the menu proposals, had approved the sourcing decisions. Walter ate without noticing the quality, his mind clearly elsewhere. "So," he said as dessert arrived, "I wanted to talk to you about something." Eleanor set down her fork. "I know," she said. He looked at her, a flicker of confusion crossing his face. "You know what? I know what you are going to say." She kept her voice calm, almost gentle. "You have been planning it for 8 months. You want a divorce." The color drained from his face. "How did you?" "I hired a private investigator." Eleanor reached into her purse and withdrew the folder. She placed it on the table between them. "His name is Dennis Harding. He is very thorough." She opened the folder and spread the contents across the white tablecloth. First, the photographs. Walter stared at them. His face with Carolyn, entering the apartment, walking through the park, dining at the restaurant across town. "Her name is Carolyn Ashby," Eleanor said. "You have been seeing her for 14 months. Walter opened his mouth, but no words came out. Next, the bank statements. The transfers from their joint accounts to his hidden account. The credit card charges. The apartment rental. $15,000, Eleanor said. "That is how much you took from our shared resources to fund your affair." He was breathing faster now, his composure crumbling. "Eleanor," he started. "I am not finished." She pulled out the next document. The notes from his consultations with his divorce attorney. The strategy to minimize her settlement. The references to her limited income and negligible separate assets. "You were going to file in January," she said. "Then you decided to wait until after our anniversary. You told Carolyn you wanted to handle it gracefully. You told her I had no idea. You told her I was pathetic." Walter's face had gone from pale to red. Sweat beaded on his forehead. "I can explain," he said. "You cannot." Eleanor's voice remained steady. "There is nothing to explain. You made your choices. I made mine." She reached into the folder once more and withdrew a different set of documents. Her own documents. The ones he had never seen. 6 months ago, my great-aunt Vivian passed away. She left me her estate. The estate included a controlling stake in a technology company called Meridian Systems. She placed the documents on the table. "My current net worth is approximately $2.1 billion. Walter stared at the papers. He did not move. He did not seem to breathe. "I could have told you," Eleanor continued. "I could have told you 3 months ago when I learned about it. I could have paid off every debt we have. I could have saved your dealership, funded your retirement, transformed our lives entirely." She leaned forward slightly. "But first, I wanted to know who I had married. I wanted to know if you loved me or if you loved what you thought you could get from me. So I asked you for $200 for a heating repair. And you refused me with contempt." The silence stretched between them. Walter's mouth opened and closed. No sound emerged. She gathered the documents and returned them to the folder. "My attorney will contact yours tomorrow," she said. "You will find the terms are not what you expected." She stood, leaving the folder on the table. Walter looked up at her, and for the first time in years, he truly saw her. Not the seamstress. Not the limited wife with her little shop. Not the pathetic woman he had dismissed and diminished for decades. He saw a woman who had built a fortune in silence. A woman who had waited with patience he could not comprehend. A woman who had tested him with $150 and watched him fail. "Eleanor," he whispered. "Goodbye, Walter." She turned and walked toward the door of the restaurant. Behind her, she heard him stand, heard his chair scrape against the floor. "Eleanor, wait." His voice was louder now, desperate. "Please. We can talk about this. We can work this out." She did not stop. She did not turn around. She walked through the door and out into the cold March night, and she kept walking until his voice faded into the silence of the city. The sidewalk stretched before her, empty and quiet. The river glittered beyond the railing, reflecting the lights of the bridge. Somewhere behind her, in a restaurant she owned, her husband of 26 years was sitting alone with the ruins of his plans scattered across a white tablecloth. She should have felt triumphant. She should have felt vindicated. Instead, she felt something she had not expected. She felt grief. Not for the marriage, which had died years ago. Not for Walter, who had chosen his own destruction. But for the woman she used to be. The woman who had believed in him. The woman who had waited patiently for him to see her, year after year, never understanding that he had stopped looking. That woman deserved mourning. Eleanor walked along the river until she reached a bench overlooking the water. She sat down and let the cold air fill her lungs. The city hummed around her, indifferent to her transformation. Her phone buzzed. A text from Walter. "Please come back. We need to talk." She did not respond. Another text. "I did not know. How could I have known?" She almost laughed. How could he have known? He could have known by paying attention. By asking questions. By treating her like a partner instead of a burden. He could have known by being the man he pretended to be, instead of the man he actually was. But that was not what he meant. He meant how could he have known she was rich? How could he have known that leaving her would cost him access to billions instead of freeing him from a liability? That was the question that mattered to him. Even now. Even at the end. She turned off her phone and sat on the bench, watching the lights dance on the water. Tomorrow, the legal process would begin. The divorce would proceed through the courts, clean and documented and irrefutable. Walter would receive exactly what he was entitled to, which was almost nothing. His affair, his financial manipulation, his elaborate preparations to minimize her settlement, all of it would work against him now. But that was tomorrow. Tonight, she simply sat with the weight of 26 years and let it settle into something she could carry. The night grew colder. The last of the downtown crowds dispersed. The city grew quiet around her. Eventually, Eleanor stood and walked to her car. She drove not to the house she had shared with Walter, but to her penthouse apartment, the space that belonged only to her. She poured herself a glass of wine and stood at the window, looking out at the city below. Somewhere out there, Walter was realizing the magnitude of his mistake. Not the affair, which he probably still thought was justified. Not the financial manipulation, which he probably thought was merely practical. But the fundamental error of judgment that had defined their entire marriage. He had looked at her and seen nothing. And because he saw nothing, he had treated her as nothing. He had dismissed her work, her contributions, her worth. He had counted her in small numbers, $200, a modest shop, a wife who asked for little, and concluded that she was small. He had been wrong. And now, for the rest of his life, he would know exactly how wrong he had been. Eleanor sipped her wine and watched the first light of dawn begin to color the eastern sky. There would be difficult days ahead. Legal proceedings, practical arrangements, the dismantling of a life she had built with a man who never deserved her. There would be conversations she did not want to have and decisions she would rather avoid. But there would also be freedom. For the first time in 26 years, she was free. Not because of the money, though the money helped. Not because of the revelation, though the revelation had been necessary. She was free because she had finally stopped waiting for someone else to see her value. She had finally understood that her worth was not determined by Walter's opinion or his attention or his approval. Her worth was determined by what she built when no one was watching. And what she had built was extraordinary. Eleanor finished her wine and went to bed as the sun rose over the city. She slept deeply and without dreams. And when she woke, she began the next chapter of her life. The morning after the anniversary dinner, Eleanor woke to 17 missed calls from Walter and 43 text messages. She did not read them. She did not need to know what excuses he had constructed overnight, what explanations he had rehearsed, what appeals he thought might move her. Instead, she made coffee and stood at the window of her penthouse, watching the city wake beneath a pale March sky. Her phone rang again. Walter. She let it go to voicemail. A moment later, another call. This time the number was different. Gloria Renton. Eleanor answered. "Good morning," Gloria said. "I received an interesting call about 20 minutes ago from an attorney named Richard Hollister. He represents your husband." That was fast. Apparently, Mr. Vance spent most of the night trying to find legal representation. Mr. Hollister was the fourth attorney he contacted. The first three declined after he explained the situation. Why did they decline? Gloria's voice carried a hint of dry amusement. "I suspect they recognized a losing case when they heard one. Mr. Hollister is younger, hungrier. He will take the retainer and bill the hours, but he knows as well as I do that your husband has no leverage." What did he want? To discuss terms. To explore whether there might be room for negotiation. Gloria paused. "I told him we would be filing our petition this morning and that he could review it at his leisure." "Good. Mrs. Vance." "Eleanor." Gloria's tone softened slightly. "Mr. Hollister mentioned that your husband is quite distressed. He said Walter kept asking how he could fix this. How he could make it right." Eleanor looked out at the river, at the bridges spanning the water, at the traffic beginning to fill the streets below. "There is nothing to fix," she said. "And nothing he could make right. Please proceed with the filing." "Understood." The divorce petition was filed at 10:15 that morning. By noon, it was a matter of public record. By evening, Eleanor's phone had begun buzzing with calls from numbers she did not recognize. She ignored them all. She went to her shop instead, unlocking the door at the usual time, turning on the lights, preparing for the day's appointments. A woman named Helen came at 11 for a fitting. A young man named David came at 1 to have his suit altered for a job interview. An elderly woman named Rose came at 3 to pick up the dress Eleanor had repaired for her. Normal life. Ordinary work. The steady rhythm of craft and service that had sustained her for 26 years. At 4 o'clock, the bell above the door chimed. Eleanor looked up from her sewing machine. Walter stood in the doorway. He looked terrible. His clothes were rumpled, his face unshaven, his eyes red from what might have been crying or might have been sleeplessness. He stood just inside the door, uncertain, as though the threshold of her shop had become a barrier he was not sure he could cross. "We need to talk," he said. Eleanor set down the fabric she had been working on. "The filing has been made," she said. "Your attorney has the documents. There is nothing to discuss." "Eleanor, please." He took a step forward. "I made mistakes. Terrible mistakes. I know that. But 26 years. Does that mean nothing?" She looked at him. This man she had married. This man she had supported and encouraged and believed in. This man who had looked at her and seen nothing worth valuing. "It meant everything to me," she said quietly. "That is why this hurts." "Then let me fix it. Let me try." His voice cracked. "I ended things with Carolyn. Last night. It is over. I will do whatever it takes. You ended things with Carolyn because you found out I am wealthy. Not because you realized what you had done was wrong. That is not true." "It is true." Eleanor's voice remained calm. "If I had been what you thought I was, a woman with nothing, you would have filed for divorce in January as planned. You would have taken what you could and left me with nothing. The only thing that changed your mind was learning that I have something you want." Walter opened his mouth to protest, then closed it. The truth of her words hung between them, undeniable. "I loved you," Eleanor said. "For a very long time, I loved you. Even when you stopped noticing me. Even when you dismissed my work. Even when you made me feel small. I kept loving you because I believed the man I married was still in there somewhere." She stood and walked toward him, stopping a few feet away. But that man does not exist. Maybe he never did. Maybe I invented him because I needed someone to believe in. Either way, he is not you. And I cannot spend another day of my life waiting for someone who is never going to appear. Eleanor. Please leave, she said. And do not come back. He stood there for a long moment, his face cycling through expressions she could not quite read. Grief, perhaps. Or anger. Or the desperate calculation of a man trying to find an angle that no longer existed. Finally, he turned and walked out the door. The bell chimed behind him. The shop fell silent. Eleanor returned to her sewing machine and picked up the fabric. Her hands were steady. Her heart was calm. She had said what needed to be said. The rest would take care of itself. The weeks that followed established a new pattern. Eleanor divided her time between the shop and her other responsibilities, the ones Walter had never known about. Video calls with Meridian's executive team. Meetings with Ruth Pearson about investment strategies. Conversations with the attorneys managing her great-aunt's estate. She moved out of the house she had shared with Walter, arranging for movers to collect her personal belongings while he was at the dealership. She took only what was hers. The sewing machines. The fabric. The photographs of her family. The award she had won at regional craft competitions years ago, back when Walter still attended and told her he was proud. Everything else she left behind. The penthouse became her home. She filled it with furniture she chose herself, colors that pleased her, art that spoke to something in her soul. For the first time in decades, she lived in a space that reflected who she actually was, rather than who someone else expected her to be. At the shop, her customers noticed the change. "You seem different lately," Margaret Holloway said one afternoon over tea. "Lighter somehow. Like a weight has been lifted." "A weight has been lifted," Eleanor said. "I am getting divorced." Margaret's eyes widened. "Oh my dear. I had no idea. Are you all right?" "I am better than I have been in years." Eleanor smiled. It turns out that ending something painful is less difficult than continuing to endure it. Margaret nodded slowly. "I felt the same way when Harold passed," she said. "We were married for 42 years, and I loved him, but—" She paused. "The last decade was hard. He was not the man I married anymore. When he was gone, I grieved, but I also felt free." "Is that terrible?" "It is honest." They sat together in comfortable silence, two women who understood something about the complexity of long marriages and the strange relief that could come with their ending. "I have something to tell you," Eleanor said finally. "Something I have not told many people." She explained about the inheritance. About Meridian Systems. About the wealth she had accumulated over 25 years and the fortune her great-aunt had left her. Margaret listened without interruption. When Eleanor finished, she was quiet for a long moment. "You know," she said eventually, "I am not surprised." "You are not. I have known you for 30 years, Eleanor. I watched you build this shop from nothing. I watched you handle difficult customers with grace and demanding deadlines with precision. I watched you create beautiful things with your hands while managing a household and a marriage that clearly was not easy." Margaret shook her head. "You were always more than Walter saw. More than anyone saw. I am just glad you finally see it too." Eleanor felt tears prick at her eyes. The first tears she had shed since the anniversary dinner. "Thank you," she said. Margaret reached across the table and squeezed her hand. "Now," she said, "tell me what you are going to do with all that money." Eleanor thought about the question. "I am going to help people," she said. "People like the woman I used to be." The foundation was established in April. Eleanor named it the Vivian Ashworth Fund, after the great-aunt who had made everything possible. Its mission was simple: to support women in trades and crafts, to provide scholarships for training, to offer small business grants for those starting out, to create opportunities for the kind of skilled, patient work that society often undervalued. Ruth Pearson helped with the legal structure. Gloria Renton reviewed the documentation. A young woman named Sarah Chen, recently hired as Eleanor's personal assistant, managed the logistics. Within weeks, applications began arriving. Women from across the state, across the country. Seamstresses and carpenters and welders and electricians. Women who had been told their work was not real work. Women who had been dismissed and diminished and underestimated. Women like Eleanor. She read every application personally. She approved funding for dozens of projects. She called applicants to ask about their goals, their challenges, their dreams. "You do not have to do this yourself," Sarah said one afternoon, watching Eleanor work through another stack of applications. "We could hire staff. Create a selection committee." "I know," Eleanor said. "But I want to. These women deserve to know that someone is paying attention. Someone who understands what they have been through." She thought about Walter. About the way he had dismissed her little shop for years. About the contempt in his voice when he refused her $200. He had never understood the value of work done with your hands. He had never grasped the dignity of craft, the satisfaction of making something beautiful and useful and real. But she understood. And now she had the resources to help others build the kind of life she had built for herself. In May, the divorce was finalized. The proceedings had been straightforward. Walter's attorney had attempted various strategies, requesting access to her separate assets, claiming that she had somehow deceived him about her financial situation, arguing that her secret wealth constituted a form of marital fraud. None of it worked. Gloria dismantled each argument with methodical precision, presenting documentation that proved Eleanor's assets had been accumulated separately and legally. The inheritance from Vivian Ashworth had been received after their marriage began, but had never been commingled with marital funds. Walter had no claim. In the end, he received his share of their modest joint savings, approximately $4,000 after accounting for the money he had taken for his affair. He received half the equity in the house, which was minimal after the remaining mortgage was calculated. He received his car and his personal belongings. That was all. Eleanor watched him across the conference room table as the final documents were signed. He looked older than he had 2 months ago. Thinner. His suit did not fit as well as it once had. She felt no satisfaction. No triumph. Only a quiet sadness for all the years they had wasted, and a deeper quiet relief that those years were finally over. After the signing, Walter lingered in the hallway as Eleanor gathered her things. "Eleanor," he said. She looked at him. "I wanted to say." He stopped, struggling with words. "I am sorry. For everything." She studied his face. He meant it, she thought. Or at least he meant something. Whether it was genuine remorse or simply regret at the consequences, she could not tell. Perhaps he could not tell either. "I hope you find what you are looking for, Walter," she said. "I genuinely do." She walked away without waiting for a response. The summer passed in a blur of activity. Eleanor divided her time between the shop and the foundation, between local alterations work and global investment decisions. She attended her first in-person board meeting at Meridian Systems, flying to San Francisco and sitting in a room with executives who managed technology used by millions of people. They treated her with respect. Not because of her wealth, though that certainly helped, but because she asked intelligent questions, made thoughtful observations, and demonstrated that she understood the business at a fundamental level. "Your great-aunt chose well," Patricia Chen told her after the meeting. "She always said the company needed someone who understood value, not just money. I think she found that person." Eleanor thought about Vivian, the great-aunt she had barely known. The woman who had watched from a distance and decided Eleanor deserved more than the life she was living. "I wish I had known her better," Eleanor said. "She talked about you sometimes," Patricia said. "When we asked why she never married, never had children, she would mention her niece back east. The one who made beautiful things with her hands. The one who stayed small when she could have been big." Patricia smiled. "She admired that about you, I think. The patience. The quiet." Eleanor carried those words with her for days afterward. She had spent so long believing that staying small was a failure. That her modest shop and her careful savings and her quiet life were signs that she had not achieved enough. But Vivian had seen it differently. Vivian had seen the value in patience. In craft. In building something real instead of chasing something impressive. And Vivian had left her everything because of it. In August, Walter's dealership closed. Eleanor learned about it from Ruth Pearson, who had been monitoring the situation as part of her overall financial management. "He took out several loans after the divorce," Ruth explained, "trying to keep the business afloat. But the market has been difficult, and his decisions have been." She paused. Emotional rather than strategic. Eleanor thought about the dealership. Walter's father had started it 40 years ago. Walter had inherited it, expanded it, struggled to maintain it for 2 decades. It had been his identity, his purpose, his source of both pride and frustration. Now it was gone. She felt a pang of something. Not sympathy exactly, but recognition. She knew what it was like to have your work dismissed and diminished. She knew the pain of losing something you had built. But she also knew that Walter's failure was his own. He had made choices. Siphoned money for his affair. Neglected the business while planning his exit from their marriage. Refused to seek help when help was available. He had done this to himself. Is there anything else? Eleanor asked. His girlfriend left him. Carolyn Ashby. Apparently she was not interested in a man without resources. Ruth's voice was carefully neutral. He has moved in with his sister Janet until he figures out his next steps. Eleanor said nothing. She had no response to offer. Walter's life had become a series of consequences, each one following naturally from choices he had made. She had not caused those consequences. She had simply stopped preventing them. In September, Janet Vance called. Eleanor almost did not answer. She saw the name on her phone and felt the familiar tightness that Janet had always provoked in her. The condescension. The subtle cruelty. The way Janet had treated her for 26 years like an unfortunate appendage Walter had acquired. But something made her pick up. Eleanor, Janet said. Her voice was different than Eleanor remembered. Smaller somehow. Less certain. Janet. I know you probably do not want to hear from me. And I understand that. But I was hoping. She paused. Could we meet? Just for coffee. There are things I need to say. Eleanor considered refusing. She owed Janet nothing. Less than nothing. But curiosity won. Tomorrow afternoon, she said. The coffee shop on 5th Street. 2 o'clock. Thank you. The coffee shop was quiet when Eleanor arrived. Janet was already there, sitting at a corner table with an untouched cup in front of her. She stood when Eleanor approached, uncertain whether to offer a handshake or a hug. She ended up doing neither. They sat across from each other in awkward silence. Thank you for coming, Janet said finally. You said there were things you needed to say. Yes. Janet looked down at her coffee, then back up at Eleanor. I owe you an apology. A real one. 4 years of. She stopped. 4 years of treating you like you did not matter. Eleanor waited. I told myself it was because you were not good enough for Walter, Janet continued. That he had married beneath him. That you held him back from achieving what he could have achieved. She shook her head. But that was not true. He held himself back. He made his own choices. And you. You were the one holding things together the entire time. Why are you telling me this now? Because I finally see it. Janet's voice cracked slightly. He is living in my guest room, Eleanor. He sits around all day, complaining about how unfair everything is. About how you deceived him. About how you ruined his life. And I listen to him, and I think about all the times I sat across from you at holiday dinners and made snide comments about your little shop. About your contributions to the family. About your worth. She looked at Eleanor with something that might have been shame. You were worth more than any of us. And we never saw it. Eleanor sat with the words for a moment. 26 years of dismissal. Of being made to feel small and insignificant and lucky to be tolerated. And now, after everything, an apology. It was not enough. Nothing could be enough to undo those years. But it was something. I appreciate you saying that, Eleanor said finally. I mean it. Every word. I know you do. Eleanor paused. But you should understand something, Janet. I did not need your family to see my worth. I always knew it. What hurt was not that you underestimated me. What hurt was that Walter did. The person who was supposed to be my partner. My ally. He looked at me every day and saw nothing. Janet was quiet. I hope he learned something from this, Eleanor continued. I genuinely do. But I cannot be the one to teach him. I spent 26 years trying, and it did not work. He has to figure it out for himself now. She stood. I wish you well, Janet. And I hope things improve for both of you. But this is where my involvement ends. She left money for the coffee and walked out without looking back. The autumn brought changes. Eleanor sold the house she had shared with Walter, splitting the modest proceeds as the divorce agreement required. She donated most of the furniture to charity, keeping only a few pieces that held genuine meaning. At the shop, business continued as usual. Customers came and went. Garments were altered, repaired, transformed. Eleanor found deep satisfaction in the work, perhaps more than she ever had before. Each stitch felt purposeful now. Each satisfied customer felt like proof that small things mattered. The foundation grew. Grants were awarded. Scholarships were given. Women across the country began building businesses and careers that might never have existed otherwise. And Meridian Systems continued to thrive. The company's stock price rose steadily. New contracts were signed. Innovations were developed. Eleanor attended quarterly board meetings, contributed to strategic discussions, and watched as her great-aunt's legacy continued to grow. She was, by any external measure, extraordinarily successful. But the success that mattered most to her was quieter. It was the peace she felt each morning when she woke in her penthouse. It was the satisfaction of work done well. It was the knowledge that she had finally stopped waiting for someone else to see her value. She had seen it herself. That was enough. In November, an unexpected invitation arrived. The city's annual charity gala was a major event, attended by business leaders and philanthropists from across the region. Eleanor had received invitations before, addressed to Walter Vance and guest, her name an afterthought. This year, the invitation was different. Ms. Eleanor Vance, it read. Founding Director of the Vivian Ashworth Fund. Table sponsor and honored guest. She almost declined. Galas were not her environment. Crowds and small talk and formal wear had never appealed to her. But Ruth Pearson encouraged her to attend. People need to see you, Ruth said. Not just your name on a check. You. The woman behind the foundation. The woman who built something extraordinary from nothing. I built it from a great deal more than nothing, Eleanor pointed out. I built it from $2.1 billion. Ruth smiled. You know what I mean. The character. The patience. The vision. That came from you, not from the money. People should know that. Eleanor considered this. I will think about it, she said. She thought about it for 3 days. Then she called Sarah Chen. I need a dress, she said. Something elegant but not ostentatious. Something that says I belong here without trying too hard to prove it. Sarah smiled. I know exactly what you mean. The gala was held at a hotel downtown, in a ballroom that glittered with chandeliers and expensive arrangements. Eleanor arrived alone, wearing a dress she had made herself from silk she had selected personally from a supplier in Italy. It fit perfectly, as her garments always did. She had worried she might feel out of place. A seamstress among business titans. A quiet woman in a loud room. But she did not feel out of place at all. She felt, for the first time in her life, exactly where she belonged. People approached her throughout the evening. Business leaders who wanted to discuss her investments. Philanthropists who wanted to learn about her foundation. Young women who had received her scholarships and wanted to thank her personally. She spoke with each of them. She listened to their stories. She asked questions about their work and their goals and their challenges. This, she realized, was what wealth was for. Not status. Not comfort. Not the petty validation of watching others envy what you had. Connection. Impact. The ability to see people and be seen in return. She was standing by the window, looking out at the city lights, when she felt someone approach. She turned. Walter stood a few feet away, looking uncertain. He was dressed in a suit that did not quite fit. His face was thinner than she remembered, his hair grayer. He looked like a man who had been through something difficult and had not yet emerged on the other side. I did not expect to see you here, Eleanor said. I almost did not come. Walter shifted his weight. A friend invited me. I think he thought it might cheer me up. And has it? Not really. He looked around the room. Everyone here knows who you are now. What you accomplished. I keep overhearing people talk about the Foundation. About Meridian. About the mysterious seamstress who turned out to be a billionaire. Does that bother you? He was quiet for a moment. It should not, he said finally. But yes. It bothers me. Not because I begrudge your success. But because I could have been part of it. I could have known. I could have shared in what you built. Instead He stopped. Instead you made other choices, Eleanor said gently. Yes. They stood in silence, looking out at the city. Below them, traffic moved through the streets. People went about their lives, unaware of the quiet conversation taking place 30 floors above. I keep thinking about the $200, Walter said. The heating repair. I have played that conversation over and over in my mind. The way I spoke to you. The things I said. I know. If I had just helped you. If I had just been kind. Walter shook his head. Everything would be different. Eleanor considered this. Maybe, she said. Or maybe you would have found another way to show me who you really were. The $200 was not the cause, Walter. It was the symptom. You did not see me. You had not seen me for years. That was the problem. Not one phone call. He was quiet. I see you now, he said finally. I know. Eleanor turned to face him fully. But it is too late. And honestly, it does not matter anymore. I do not need you to see me. I see myself. Walter's eyes glistened. For a moment, she thought he might cry. I wish I had been different, he said. I know. She reached out and touched his arm briefly. I wish you had been too. She walked away, rejoining the crowd, leaving him standing alone by the window. She did not look back. The winter brought quiet days. Eleanor settled into her new life with something like contentment. She woke each morning in her penthouse, made coffee, watched the sun rise over the river. She went to her shop and worked with her hands, creating beautiful things from fabric and thread. She managed her foundation and her investments, using her resources to help others build the lives they deserved. She thought about Walter sometimes. Not with anger or regret, but with a distant sadness. He had been her husband for 26 years. He had been the person she built her life around, even as he failed to notice what she was building. Now he was gone, and she remained. The same woman she had always been, but finally visible. Finally seen. Finally free to be exactly who she was without apology. On Christmas Eve, she received a card in the mail. No return address. Just her name written in handwriting she recognized. Inside, a simple message. Thank you for 26 years. I know I did not deserve most of them. I hope you find everything you are looking for. Walter. She read it twice, then set it aside. She did not respond. There was nothing more to say. The new year began with fresh snow and a sense of possibility. Eleanor attended the Foundation's first annual award ceremony, presenting scholarships to 12 women who had demonstrated exceptional skill and dedication in their chosen trades. She shook each woman's hand. She looked into each woman's eyes. She told each of them that she believed in their potential. You are not small, she said in her speech. Your work is not small. What you do with your hands, the care you bring to your craft, the lives you improve through your skill. None of it is small. It is essential. And it is seen. The women applauded. Some of them cried. Afterward, Margaret Holloway found Eleanor in the crowd. That was beautiful, Margaret said. Every word. I meant every word, Eleanor replied. I know you did. That is what made it beautiful. They stood together, watching the women mingle and celebrate, watching the beginning of something that would grow and spread and change lives for years to come. You know, Margaret said, I have been thinking about something you told me months ago. About the $200. About how that was the moment you knew. Eleanor nodded. I think we all have moments like that, Margaret continued. Small tests that reveal big truths. The question is whether we pay attention to them. Most people do not. No. Most people do not. Margaret looked at her with warmth. But you did. And look what you built because of it. Eleanor thought about this. I built a life, she said finally. Not a perfect one. Not an easy one. But mine. Entirely mine. Is that not what we are all trying to do? Yes. Eleanor smiled. I suppose it is. Spring arrived with its usual promises. The trees in the park near Eleanor's shop began to bud. The days grew longer. The world emerged from winter's grip and stretched toward something new. On a warm afternoon in April, Eleanor sat in her shop working on a wedding dress. The bride was a young woman named Rachel who reminded Eleanor of herself 30 years ago. Hopeful. Excited. Certain that the man she loved would love her back forever. Eleanor said nothing about her own marriage. Some lessons could not be taught. They had to be learned through living. It is beautiful, Rachel said, looking at her reflection in the mirror. Perfect. I am glad you are happy with it. Happy does not cover it. Rachel turned to face her. Mrs. Vance, can I ask you something? Of course. How do you know? Rachel hesitated. How do you know if someone really loves you? Not just who they think you are, but who you actually are. Eleanor set down her pins and considered the question. You pay attention to the small things, she said. How they speak to you when they are tired. How they treat you when you need help. Whether they see you clearly or only see what they want to see. She paused. Love is not in the grand gestures. It is in the daily choices. The thousand small moments when someone decides to value you or dismiss you. That is where the truth lives. Rachel nodded slowly. That is good advice. I learned it the hard way, Eleanor said. But I learned it. The wedding dress was finished 2 weeks later. Eleanor delivered it personally, watching Rachel try it on one final time in the room where she would become a wife. Thank you, Rachel said. For everything. Be happy, Eleanor replied. And pay attention. She drove home through the late afternoon light, thinking about weddings and marriages and the long roads between hope and truth. She had walked that road herself. She had emerged on the other side, not unscathed, but wiser. Stronger. More herself than she had ever been. That was worth something. Perhaps it was worth everything. In May, the foundation awarded its 100th scholarship. Eleanor attended the ceremony, speaking briefly about her great-aunt Vivian and the legacy of women supporting women. She shook hands and posed for photographs and listened to stories that echoed her own. Afterward, she walked through the city alone, letting the evening settle around her. She thought about the path that had led her here. The small shop she had opened 26 years ago. The investments she had built in secret. The marriage she had endured and the divorce she had finally claimed. She thought about Walter, wherever he was now. Learning his lessons or refusing to learn them. Becoming a better man or remaining exactly who he had always been. She hoped he was learning. She genuinely did. But his journey was his own. She had completed hers. She reached the river and stood at the railing, looking out at the water. The same river she had watched from her penthouse on so many nights. The same river that had witnessed her transformation from invisible wife to visible woman. The sun was setting, painting the sky in shades of gold and rose. She was 59 years old. She was wealthy beyond measure. She had work she loved and causes she believed in and a foundation that would continue long after she was gone. But more than any of that, she had peace. Not happiness, exactly. Happiness was too simple a word for what she felt. This was deeper. This was the quiet satisfaction of a life lived with integrity. Of choices made with wisdom. Of value recognized and claimed and shared. She had been underestimated for decades. She had been dismissed and diminished and overlooked. And she had used that time to build something extraordinary. Not to prove anyone wrong. Not for revenge. Not for validation. Simply because she could. Because the work was good. Because small things mattered. Eleanor turned away from the river and walked home through the gathering dusk. Tomorrow, she would open her shop and greet her customers and alter garments with the same care she had always brought to her work. Tomorrow, she would review foundation applications and attend board meetings and make decisions that affected thousands of lives. Tomorrow, she would continue to be exactly who she was. A seamstress. A businesswoman. A philanthropist. A woman who had learned, finally, that her worth was not determined by anyone else's opinion. A woman who had asked her husband for $150 and discovered, in his contemptuous refusal, everything she needed to know. A woman who had built an empire in silence and revealed it only when she was ready. A woman who had chosen patience over confrontation, consequence over revenge, truth over performance. A woman who was finally, completely, free. The city lights came on around her, one by one, as she walked home through the quiet streets. Behind her, the river flowed on, carrying the reflections of 1,000 illuminated windows toward the sea. Above her, the first stars appeared in the darkening sky. And ahead of her, the rest of her life waited, full of possibility, empty of regret. She smiled as she walked. It was a good life. It was her life. And she would live every remaining day of it exactly as she chose. The end.